Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rhythms of Access, the podcast where disability, creativity, and art converge. We spotlight candid conversations with disabled artists who are reshaping the cultural world with authenticity and vision. This episode is brought to you by Blurring the Boundaries and the Canadian Accessible Musical Instruments Network with support from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. That was a mouthful. Anyways, so here we are today. We have a very special guest, Robin Hahn. Robin Hahn is a joyfully disabled operatic soprano, stage director, music educator, and disability advocate whose performances have spanned the globe from Germany to New York to Disneyland. And Robin's voice has been praised as sublime with a beautiful resonant soprano full of color. And this was at Opera Canada. And her stage work as a director is known for queering the canon and centering accessibility. She co-founded Opera Mariposa, Canada's only 100% openly disabled-led opera company, and is a bold voice in disability advocacy and creative disruption. Robin, welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you and glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. I feel like this has been a long time coming. I think we spoke about a month and a half or two ago.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm just so glad that we are finally here and we're getting to chat and to let people into your world a little bit.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I love what y'all are doing here. It's it's wonderful and vital work. So I'm glad to chat about it.
Thank you so much. So, Robin, usually when guests come into this podcast, we like to play a little game. We have an icebreaker question that, gives people a little bit of an insight of who you are, up and close and personal. So if you do not mind, I will jump into this game if that's okay
Wonderful.
with you. All right. So, Robin, if opera could break one rule or expectation for every person who watches it, what's the first rule you'd want it to break?
That it's stuffy and old-fashioned. Uh, yeah. Uh,
Go on.
well, yes, a lot of the operatic canon that we see most of the time is, up to 400 years old. But but opera is the type of art form that is made new every time it is made. It is not the type of art form that continues to be the same version of art that was made if you close the lights, turn off the lights, close the door, like a painting or a sculpture. Every single time it is made, it is a new set of humans open up the score and remake it all over again. So opera can be modern, joyful, weird, reinterpreted, turned on its head. It can be made accessible. It can be sung in all sorts of languages. It can be sung with surtitles. It can involve some participation from the audience. It can be whatever any production wants it to be. Um, and it doesn't have to follow uh, every tradition that has been set out for the hundreds of years before. Opera can be
Wow,
wild. That's
that's very
my
interesting. I've never heard it explained this way. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. That it can be modern and it can be, uh, you know, up to whatever the standards are right now.
Mhm.
That's interesting. Thank you. So, Robin, let's go back in time for a little bit here, to your early artistic journey. What first drew you to the world of opera and storytelling?
Well, I like to say that I became an opera singer by accident.
Okay.
I I started performing when I was like 4, in the sense that, I drove past a ballet school on my way to preschool every day.
Wow.
And eventually I pointed out the window at my mom when my mom was driving me and said, "Mom, what's that?" And she said, "That's a ballet school." And I said, "I want to do that." So I
Wow.
did. And I did that very seriously for a long time. But after doing that, I started doing theater. Uh, and from there, I started taking voice lessons. I like to say I started taking voice lessons because I had a crush on a guy in my 6th grade class. And he
Okay.
was going to a summer musical theater program that I wanted to go be at. I started taking voice lessons to audition for that, and I simply never stopped. So
Wow. Shoot your shot.
yeah, that never worked out, but what did work out was
That's
the
okay.
singing. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I started doing musical theater and film and television around that time.
Okay.
But opera, it turns out, is often what happens if you sort of learn to open up your voice rather, and sing, and don't pick a style.
Mhm.
So if you just keep learning to open up the voice more and more and more, eventually you just fall into opera. So by the time I was about 16, I just
Mhm.
sort of looked around and went, I guess I'm an opera singer now. And I was.
Wow.
um,
Wow.
yeah, I as for what keeps me here, I just like I mean, I love the sensations that
Mhm.
are created by creating that type of sound. But
Mhm.
fundamentally, the through line through all of those things that I have done is that I am a storyteller. And
Mhm.
opera just happens to be the way that I tell stories now, and the way that I connect with people now. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so it kind of
So do
happened by accident.
you, so I'm curious, do you write your own production as well, like your own music?
No, I have
Or do you
never.
choose, or do you
I
choose specific
Yeah.
types? Like what do you lean on? Yeah.
So when I'm directing and whatnot, depending on who I'm directing with, I may
Mhm.
have some input on what opera we do, but we usually pick from the canon, meaning the sort
Okay.
of set of 200 to 300 operas that people sort of expect to see. But what
Right.
I do is that I go through it for everything that I do not want to see, and I do not want to make people perform
Okay.
in 2025, and I throw
Yeah.
that out and I rewrite it
Gotcha.
as necessary. Um,
Okay.
most uh well, wonderfully, all of this stuff is in public domain, so I
Yeah.
can do what I wanted to it, no matter what any original composer may or may not have wanted. But
Yeah.
b, even um like very often those original composers were sort of the innovators of their time. It's just, their time was
Right.
X hundred number of years ago. So
Mhm.
uh I often, for example, I'm currently directing a production of Magic Flute, um
Wow.
with several gender bent characters, some trans characters, and I like to think that Mozart would love that, because Mozart was uh pardon my language, but a little bit of a
That's
piss
okay.
disturber at
I
his
see. I see.
day. So I think he'd love it anyway.
Okay. Okay. That's awesome. That's really cool. So like you talked about production. It looks like you wear many hats. Um,
Yep.
you're a performer, you're a director, you're an educator, and you're an advocate. Right. How do you balance those identities and how do they feed off each other?
Oh, that's wonderful. Um, well, for me, that is actually my like most accessible version of my artistic career, rather than picking one or the other. Because, for example, if one decides one wants to be, a full-time opera singer, first of all, the
Mhm.
amount of hustle culture sort of built into the idea of what that would look
Right.
like is already,
Yeah.
it's a lot for me. Um,
Okay.
it involves a lot of traveling around the world. It involves a lot of uh, going places on short notice and just having money somehow magically in
Hmm.
your back pocket, which, disabled and an artist, maybe not just sort of lying around because
Yeah.
I for like a spontaneous audition to flight to New York from here in Vancouver, not
Wow.
always there.
Wow.
It involves a lot of being on long haul buses. Involves a lot of me carrying everything I own in a suitcase
Mm,
around the cobbled streets of uh, Germany. So, not great for the floppy, the
I feel like
floppy.
there's a story there
Oh boy.
that you may want to tell us.
Oh yeah, sure. Well,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, that's sort of how I discovered um, um, that my body was doing the things that I later understood to not just be, quirks of my body, but in fact to be my
Mhm,
disability. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have a connective tissue disorder,
mhm,
which means that my body just doesn't make connective tissue correctly, and
mm.
I am therefore just sort of floppy from the inside. So carrying everything I own around over the cobbled streets of Germany, that's a real fast way to not be
Wow.
functional.
If you don't mind me asking, so what happened in Germany?
Sure. So I moved to Germany to sort of pursue the typical operatic career because, as you might
Okay.
imagine, in Canada, there's not a ton of work in the opera sector here culturally. Opera is not, Canada's main focus, I would say,
Sure.
but there's much more work available in Germany. So a lot of people who want to pursue that sort of traditional operatic career moved to
Mhm.
Germany to go do that, and I did. I was lucky in that process, and that's in the sense that my mother was born and raised in Austria, so I've been hearing lots of German from a very young age. So I knew I already had like a way in that I could communicate in that space pretty easily. Um, so I went, and I was, looking forward to doing all of that hustle culture stuff that is inherently inaccessible and built
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the audition process. Because in Germany, like in New York, not in New York, in North America, you as a performer are expected to go where the audition is. This is
Right.
slightly less true after the beginning of the pandemic and more things have become remote, but that's still the case. And I discovered in the process of doing that my body just could not keep up. It was not capable. I couldn't do it. I ended up, lying in laid out for months. It just didn't. It was clear that my body was not capable, and
Mm.
so I started trying to figure out why that was. It took a minute and a lot of me diving into the depths of the internet because, of course, in Germany, as a young artist, I
Yeah,
my medical insurance covered a broken leg, not why does my body not function the way I expect it to.
that
Um,
must be a scary time.
it was a time. There were times when like I would just be on the floor and not understand why.
Mm,
Uh, there's a very vivid memory of me like chopping veggies in a kitchen and then having to lie down on the floor of the kitchen because I couldn't stay upright anymore, and looking up, and over top of me, over the edge of the counter, was the knife I had been chopping, and I couldn't get
Oh,
up to push it away. And like that was definitely a moment where I went, something is not going according to plan here.
mhm.
Uh, so I started doing a lot of research. In this case, I sort of thank my ADHD brain for getting super hyper focused on it.
Yeah,
um, I went eyeballs deep in medical journals. Thankfully, again, I find that really fascinating, being a
yeah,
nerd at heart. And
yeah.
I was lucky in a lot of ways, and I found my diagnosis, and through that, the requirements that I need to live my life in the most accessible way, and the ways,
Mhm,
and also a greater understanding of my body. I now like to
mm,
say that my body just works in a different paradigm than
mhm,
most people's bodies. Its
mhm,
understanding of how it should work is just sort of
mhm,
fundamentally different at the connective
mhm,
tissue level. But
mhm.
for working within that paradigm, I think it works fairly well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
So yeah, I left Germany understanding that this was not how I could build my career. So I came back to my hometown of Vancouver and built an artistic career in a way that was a little more accessible for me. Much less travel,
Mhm,
uh, could do much more cherry picking of the things that I could do at the same time, over top of each other, or at different times, rather than just going after everything that possibly came along.
yeah.
Um, uh,
And
yeah.
sorry for cutting you off.
No worries.
While you're now like adjusting to how your body now functions, um, were there like was it like a very seamless transition where you're like, okay, it looks like I can do this, I cannot do this, or I can tackle this in this way? Or was there a lot of like trial and error or a lot of lows before you got to the highs?
Yeah. I mean, in on the one hand, I was very lucky in the sense that I had already been a co-founder of Opera Mariposa at the time. At the time, of course, we
Okay.
didn't know that we were 100% disability led and run. I was
Oh,
the
okay.
token, like the quote unquote token non-disabled person.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay.
Um, but that had been sort of part, like we had just made an opera company that was accessible to the other disabled people involved already.
Gotcha.
So I already had these spaces that were already sort of access focused once I
Mhm.
discovered that I actually needed them. So that was incredibly lucky. And I would love to be not the outlier in that. I would love there to be more
Mhm.
spaces like Mariposa where when people
Mhm.
understand new things about their bodies and new things about their access needs, that they're just there are spaces already in place in the operatic world.
Mhm.
So on that one hand, I had that. But on the other hand, you know, uh, my disability is not like linear. It's not just one thing does this thing. Um, and every day is sort of a new and exploration of, and also like sort of interrogation of my body and its ability.
Yeah.
Um, in this case, in this situation, on this day, in this
Yeah.
weather.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So there were also things that I'm still discovering.
Hmm.
One of the things that I discovered quite quickly is that because my connective tissue, meaning my ligaments, my fascia, all that stuff, they don't hold my body together um, adequately, I'd say. I had to actually change my singing technique to be more centered around like the muscular, an understanding of what the muscles would do, a sort of a strength-based sort of
Yeah.
technique, so that I could sort of manually do the support that my body wouldn't naturally do.
Hmm.
So I had to do that. But at the same time, like there were also things that I just didn't occur to me that I would need until I started, until it just magically happened. For example, I long story short, I started using a cane for one trip to Disneyland with my family. Uh, which just because I knew that there's a lot of walking involved and that my body was not great at that. So I
Yeah.
went, try a cane. Let's see if that works out. Oh my goodness, the way that it changed my life.
Wow.
And I could tell immediately. So, I, but it didn't occur to me until I was experimenting with that for just this one specific
One. Yeah.
situation that it was actually
Yeah.
useful for so much of my life. So I think like
Hmm.
to this day, there's still trial and error. There's
Hmm.
still exploration. And I never know, what I'm gonna be doing with my body next. But
Yeah.
I don't live in any other one. So it's like that's as much part of creating my art as, figuring out what repertoire to sing is
Hmm.
for any other singer.
Interesting. So with this understanding and with this mindset, what's your vision for a more inclusive opera world?
Ooh. Well, I don't know if you may have guessed this, but the opera world tends to be a little bit shall we say traditional.
Hoity-toity, yes.
um and yet I think that the most interesting art being made, the art that connects with the most people,
Okay.
is the stuff that is uh reimagining what opera
Hmm.
can be. That's the stuff that really um,
Hmm.
seems to grab the most people.
Right.
I fundamentally like one of the things that I like to say is that like at its base, opera the opera sector loves to create forums and think tanks and meetings of tends to be older non-disabled white men in rooms in suits where they
Yeah.
discuss amongst each other, why is opera as an art form dying? And to me, the answer has always been quite simple, and that's that opera isn't accessible. And that's not every sense of the word accessible. I don't just mean, you know, the way that we talk about
Yeah.
accessibility for disabled
Accessibility.
folks, but
Yeah.
also like
Just getting into the field. Yeah.
getting into the field, having letting audience members who have never been to an opera before feel welcome, having
Mm.
ticket prices that are accessible for all folks,
Mm.
letting people know that the vast majority of opera performances on planet Earth are going to have surtitles or subtitles,
Yeah.
so that in the language in any number of locally spoken
Yeah.
languages. So like if opera becomes an accessible sector in all by all of those definitions, opera becomes a rich and self-sustaining artistic sector like so many others, in my view. Um, so I think
Wow.
my vision for opera is that it is accessible in all by all definitions of accessibility.
Wow. Wow. That's from a social. That's very interesting.
It's a, just a tiny little goal.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. My next question to you is, since you started, since your organization started in 2011, Opera Mariposa,
Mhm.
um, how has it evolved? What has changed from then till now? Because that's over 10 years of
Mhm.
evolution happening there. And are
Yeah.
some of the things that you just touched on
Mhm.
in there as well?
Yeah, so we started essentially, it was myself and the woman I'd call my forever partner in operatic crime, Jacqueline
Hmm.
Coe. We started it on a night drive one day because the opera in our area wasn't accessible to her. Um,
Okay.
she has myalgic encephalomyelitis. She's one of the like sort of foremost opera singers talking about this on planet Earth. Um, and the operatic process just wasn't accessible to her. So we built one that was. It
Hmm.
at the time, it was sort of focused on being by young artists for young artists, creating more opportunities so that they could build resumes and then use that experience and move on. Um, that was the original billing, but in doing that to make a space accessible for her, we also made a space that was more accessible for everyone. And then when I discovered that my body wasn't just quote unquote quirky, which is sort of how I
Yeah.
had imagined it, and I was like, oops, I'm disabled too. We looked around at
Yeah.
everyone who worked for us and went, that makes it everyone. That makes
Wow.
every single one of us. Well, let's run with it because we're the only people who can.
Hmm.
And we have the infrastructure already built to be able to do that. So that
Mhm.
was a major pivot. The next one was, of course, in 2020,
Okay.
during the COVID pandemic, because
Interesting.
the vast majority of those people who are disabled and involved in Mariposa are very immunocompromised and cannot risk acquiring
Yep.
COVID-19. So to this day, since that day, Opera Mariposa has not been involved in any live performances whatsoever. That said,
Really?
there has been a lot of pivoting. So that's involved some singles being released, some music videos of operatic arias rather
Yeah.
being released. That's involved backing research and um, distributing information about more immuno-inclusive live events for others
Mhm.
to be able to do. Um, yeah, that's what Mariposa has sort of pivoted towards. That doesn't mean that
Hmm.
Mariposa wouldn't is never going to do that in future, but
Yeah.
the sort of the center of the work is about immuno-inclusivity because at this point, um, yeah, it's just not yet. We're not yet in a position where there's true safety
Yeah.
for our group. That said, I work outside of Mariposa as well. And
Okay.
I have been doing some live stuff myself, but everything that I do, all rehearsals are masked, despite the
Okay.
fact that at the beginning of the pandemic, artists around the world were like, well, oh, it's so hard to sing in a mask. Well, you know, A, we found the masks that is useful for each individual humans, and B, we got used to it.
Yeah.
And if we're really doing rehearsals where a singer just can't do this with this mask on, this part of the music with the mask on,
Yeah.
then they do a certain amount of testing before that day, and that singer can take their mask off for that rehearsal. We
Okay.
then get, when we get to show times, we start a protocol of rapid testing for several days before the masks come off and we go into shows.
Okay.
We have like a quite in-depth protocol for the vast majority of the shows that I do outside, to be able to protect people as much as possible. We also do all of our rehearsals and performances aware of where the air filters are in any space. In fact, we bring our own.
Wow.
The conductor for my magic flute that I'm directing right now conducts every rehearsal with an air filter going at her feet, and they will be doing so in the pit, in the orchestra pit, for all of the shows as well as the four that are
Goodness.
built into our theater's ceiling. And I have a little pocket one that I like to clip onto my belt loop when I rehearse on stage as well, to help protect
Wow.
people, to
Wow.
make things more immuno-inclusive. Because, like, yes, Mariposa is doing this in this very sort of that is core to our work, but fundamentally, immune inclusivity for the entire sector, like, the small changes are impactful. Like,
Yeah.
one of the easiest, cheapest, most accessible ways to make opera more accessible for more people is to just have more masking involved.
Mm.
It's dirt cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
Is
every added mask in a space for more
yeah.
time makes that space a little bit safer.
Mm.
So so we also talk about what can people do in live performance spaces, and well, at least outside of Mariposa, we model that.
Mm. That's impressive. I
It's
really respect that. I
uh,
really respect that. I can only imagine some of the pushback uh, you folks may have received throughout that process.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, no, it's commendable to say
Yeah.
the least. Yeah.
Well, it's necessary, and in 2025, it's also sort of feeling left behind, because there is
Mm.
so much vocabulary around back in the pandemic, when the pandemic was
Mm.
going on, and like, the science is in, the pandemic is still happening.
It still is happening for sure
Uh,
because I caught COVID. My wife and I caught COVID for the very first time last summer,
oh,
and that's 2024. That was in
yeah,
2024 summer,
yeah.
and we hadn't had it the whole peak of
It's
COVID, and
it's
it's
still
still
going
here.
around,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it is doing damage that the science is coming in on very clearly to
Mm.
people's systems, that is lasting.
Mm.
And yeah, like, to be inclusive, to truly be accessible,
Yeah.
we like, safety is truly part of that, and a place is not safe if um, people, particularly who are immunocompromised, but like all people, are at risk of developing something that can last, and like, profoundly affect disability, or you know health for the rest of people's lives, which it does.
Mhm.
So uh, to me, that doesn't mean uh, that we therefore advocate for shutting down art. That means we advocate for making art safely, or as safely as we can,
Yeah.
and being as inclusive as we can. So
Mm.
for me, that involves a lot of remote work when when possible,
Yeah.
including online options for people who cannot afford to be somewhere with groups of humans. And that just what it really fundamentally requires is creativity. And we in the art sector should be, you know, raring to go with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mariposa has been excited to yell about that from the rooftops since
That's
2020.
awesome. So, Robin, I've been intrigued by something.
Mhm.
You describe yourself as joyfully disabled.
Mhm.
What does that joyful framing mean to you, and how has that shaped your creativity and your advocacy? So let's first start off like the term joyfully disabled, and then we can dive in deeper into the rest.
Sure. I like to say I'm joyfully disabled because, well, first of all, I come from just as an individual human person being very sunny. That is my natural state of being.
Yeah.
I can be obnoxiously so. I am that sunny friend. Tend to be the happiest person people meet on any given day.
Right.
Um, but you know, at the same time, you know, naturally humans, you know, we feel all sorts of ways about things that
Yeah.
can cause frustration or barriers in our lives. And that doesn't mean that that doesn't happen, because that would
Right.
be sort of a toxic or almost poisonous
Yeah.
enforced sense of I must be positive.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
true joy is is to me a sort of an act of embracing as opposed to an act of determining what your emotion is going to be about that
Yeah.
embracing in the end. Um, so yeah, there are days when I'm bummed about it.
Yeah.
Sure, there are. And there are weeks when I'm bummed about it. And there are times when
Mm.
I'm more bummed or others. But fundamentally, I like aside from the, you know, the day-to-day, you know, ups and downs that
Yeah.
any human experiences,
Mm.
fundamentally, um, disability is a joyful part of my identity that I love and celebrate because I want to celebrate every disabled person who has come before me and is now and comes after, and I'd like to do that through my art. We
Mm.
as a community are one of love and joy amongst ourselves, and I love framing that through art as well. So, for example, I talked earlier about my canes. For those who may be watching the video, I'll bring one out. My canes
Oh
are
man.
very sparkly. I have four
Do
different
you
ones.
custom make them?
No, there's a jeweler out of Toronto who makes them. Her name is Jacqueline Kent. I have,
Okay.
yeah,
So can I pause you for a second? For
absolutely.
those who may be just be listening to the podcast, do you want to provide a visual description
Absolutely.
of
So
of
this one that I
yours?
have right
Yeah.
now, from like through the entire stem of this cane is bedazzled. And at the top
Mhm.
and the top near the handle, the bedazzling is pink, and then it ombres down to a sort of white diamante type color towards
Mhm.
the base.
Wow.
All four of my canes are like that with different colors of sparkles. And I
Wow.
perform with them. They match my outfits in daily life. So of course I pick the one that matches the big operatic gown that I'm singing concert in, or if I'm directing, or
Yeah.
if I'm on stage. It depends
Yeah.
on the show. But I'll very often, like, it'll be part of my costume. For example, I have an all red one that goes with a giant red ball gown that I will be wearing singing
Wow.
Hannah and the Merry Widow this June. That
Wow.
is a sort of like a fundamentally joyful thing. It doesn't
Yeah.
hide the mobility aid, because why would I want to do
Yeah.
that? My
Yeah.
mobility aid is not just something that makes my life more accessible.
No.
Not just the thing that makes that makes it easier to bring my art to
Yeah.
people. It
Like
is part
access
of my
doesn't need to
art.
be ugly. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, it can also look fabulous.
And there you go. There you go.
um uh there are and if I'm directing, I often end up directing disabled singers, and then we talk about, do you want to bring your mobility aid on stage, or do you not? If you do, great, let's work with it, and we're not hiding anything, you know.
Yeah.
I've heard of
Yeah.
people in the opera world who have lost contracts because they were told that their cane was not period accurate. Well, when do you think a cane was first
Wow.
invented?
Wow.
Bizarre, bizarre, right?
Like
Right?
the cane was used as fashion statement,
I know,
like in the 19th century, in the 18th century, like
exactly. Truly, truly bizarre things
yeah.
to say to a human person. Or like you know, what do you say back to that when someone says that, right? Like I
Wow.
don't know how to respond to that statement. But so instead of, you know, whatever that is, let's
Yeah.
celebrate the use of mobility aids instead, or medical aids of any
Yeah.
kind, right? Also in the sort of general canon of opera that I was mentioning before, there were several
Yeah.
operas that with canonically disabled characters, some of which are treated as disabled in the story, and some like traditionally kind of aren't. It's just sort of treated as a plot point as opposed to this is a disability story. Well,
Yeah.
anytime I'm singing that or directing that, that's going to be a disability story,
Hmm.
period. There are
Wow.
several, there's a trope in opera that all of the sopranos um, die very glamorously of
Hmm.
tuberculosis because, of course, the stereotype for a lot of this time period was that it was a very glamorous thing for a beautiful thing for people to have. Well,
Mhm.
that's a disability story.
Hmm.
And it's not just a story of, you know, romance and glamour and let's be
Yeah.
sad that the soprano has died. This is a disability story. And let's
Hmm.
make it that actively
Hmm.
and center that on purpose.
Wow.
So it's like fundamentally a part of all the art that I make.
Wow.
Not just because it's a part of me and like my
Yeah.
art, certainly when I'm singing, is very much of my body because that's where my sound comes from. So it's not just because that's the instrument. It's because
Yeah.
it's a choice. Joyfully
Good.
disabled art.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Interesting. Wow. And I'm also a fan of your mug. I think I mentioned that the first time we met. Um, yeah, no, that's awesome. So what you seem to be like a huge storyteller. But what role has social media played in your storytelling? I've seen a lot of content. I don't want to, to give away anything here, but I just want to hear from you, what role, yeah, because
Uh,
you have quite a following, you have quite a very strong presence in your social media platform.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, very early on, as I was shaping this more accessible version of my career, once I discovered that that was necessary for me, um, from the perspective of someone who had this support system already in place through Mariposa, I was like, wow, I am incredibly lucky globally to be a disabled opera singer with
Mm,
this much support system. And yet,
mm,
I am not the world's only disabled opera singer. In fact,
right.
as you well know, you know, disability is so is everywhere, and disabled people
Yeah.
are have been here for as long as humans have been here.
Mhm.
Um, there are disabled people in opera. We are already here, um, and it's really time the opera world sort of took uh, took ownership of that, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so early on, I went, I would love to be able to communicate that with the world and sort of make it clear that I am not the only one, that
Mm,
that I'm not an outlier. In fact, uh, the opera world has this intent, has built within it not just this hustle culture, but this sort of pressure to quote unquote seem healthy because your body
yeah.
is your instrument. So therefore, if there is something perceived as being, ugh, you know, not at like peak or whatever that means, um, within your body, that means that you therefore can't be an opera singer. Well, that's just fundamentally not true. what it means is that one of two things happen. Either disabled opera singers end up getting pushed out of the industry they love and could otherwise have happily participated in if it had been accessible, or two, people hide their disability. Those are sort of the options. So I started a YouTube channel about opera, disability, queerness, cats, and tea, about the intersections between opera and disability, and essentially talking about and centering ideas that say that, like the disabled humans in the arts are already here. We've always been here, and we are not just, a special, but in fact integral part of the arts community. So I've been making videos on YouTube for several years about that, and on Instagram as well. But right now I'm directing 2 shows and in another. So I living on Crip time as one often does. Some of that has tends to it speeds up and slows down based on what else I'm doing, but there's still lots of stuff in the works, and I will always come back to it. I have 3 videos cooking right now, because there's always more to say. I mean, that you have a wonderful podcast about it.
It's true. No, it's true. It's true. Like, when you were starting out, did you struggle with like finding, people in your field who looked like you in some way? Like, were you able to see yourself at any point, or did you have to really kind of like create your own path?
I really did have to create my own path. Yes, there have been some famous disabled singers throughout the years. That has occasionally happened. There have there was a fairly celebrated Austrian baritone with dwarfism who sang in the 20th century a lot, mostly concert work though. Maria Callas very famously had health concerns that, today we might understand as disability. But there's really very little out there. So I sort of made it my business with YouTube to be the representation I wish I had had, because I have the luck of having the support system and of not being or feeling myself as alone as I know so many disabled opera singers around the world have felt. So I have the privilege of experiencing that, so I feel like I have in some ways the duty of being that. I have the space, so I must, because I want not to be the exception. Artists around the world deserve to not have me be the exception. We deserve access and deserve, safety to be ourselves in the fullness of ourselves, including disability, not despite disability, including it.
Absolutely.
Historically, asking for access needs in opera may have been considered like diva behavior, but which is sort of, we look back on and go, ooh, that's not a great look. It's not a great look. But we now, as a sector in opera, are beginning to get there. Like, truly, since the beginning of Mariposa, I can see change that has happened within the operatic world, and I know that Mariposa has been a part of that change and a part of generating that discussion, and that is like one of the greatest honors of my life. So I will do that as long as I can and have to.
Wow. And with that, what guidance would you give to young disabled artists, or even not young disabled, but disabled artists who are navigating the arts world and are dreaming of their own projects as well? Like, what sort of guidance, words of wisdom would you share with them?
Sure. Well, essentially that while we do experience a certain narrative as to what an arts career looks like, and even what a successful arts career looks like, there's a sort of an extra hang up in the concept of success in there as well. Because there certainly is a pressure in the opera world that seems to suggest that if your career doesn't look exactly like this, that is
Yeah.
because of failure. But that's not true. It's people can build a career that doesn't look like this and this and this and this steps. Bang. If you follow these steps correctly, then bang, you will be a famous opera singer. There are lots of people, there are lots of reasons why someone doesn't end up with a career that looks like that. Maybe they want a family. Maybe they just start that process and decide, oh, wait, I don't like this. There are lots of good reasons for that. So, meaning that there are lots of wonderful artists who, for a lot of reasons, build their own careers in ways that suit them best. And that for disabled artists, building their own careers, it means building the careers that are accessible to us, because access, as we know, does not look like one thing. Like just making something ADA compliant doesn't mean
Yeah.
congratulations, you are completely accessible now. That's not how that
Yes,
works.
sort of. Here's a badge.
Yeah, like congratulations, you have completed accessibility. um so it will always require change for organizations that you might work with. So creating something and like customization. So creating something that's custom for you is built in with that too. And it may not look like what there is pressure to imagine it to look like, but the only person who is an arbiter of what an accessible, interesting, fulfilling career looks like to you is you. And there are people around who want to help build that, and you're not alone. As much as there are narratives um, that suggest that that's the case, that you are in fact alone, but you're not. For example, my disability, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I have one of 13 types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the most common type. And the most common type is autosomally dominant, meaning that it is a dominant genetic trait. It's in fact very common. So many of us.
Yeah.
And there are places where we create our own access. So there are communities out there for us. And if you're looking for coaches or whatnot, some coaches, can be, shall we say, just a wee bit ableist
Yeah.
around the world. But if you encounter that, obviously it's terrible. But that doesn't mean that the whole industry isn't for you, no matter what they say. It just means that coach isn't for you.
Yeah.
If you find a space that isn't accessible, that's their loss, not yours.
Yeah. Wow.
I walk into all auditions with my cane, and if they're going to write me off for it, rather than discussing what my body
Ways. Yeah.
is doable for my body, with me, well, then that's a them problem and not a me problem.
Hmm.
And I am
Yeah.
glad to know that, because then I don't have to waste my energy.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Robin, what's next for you? What's coming up for 2025 and beyond? What are you able to talk about of what's
Okay,
coming up?
sure.
Let's put it that way. I don't want you to,
Sure.
feel pressured to share.
Well, to finish out the 2024-2025 operatic season, I've directed this production of Magic Flute that is called Magic Flute Reimagined. So you can imagine how much we've turned it on its head. Here in the Lower Mainland in the North Shore, that'll be in May. After that, excuse me.
Okay.
I am directing A Merry Widow out in the other part of the Lower Mainland, complete other end,
Yeah.
in June. I'm also singing in that. That happened very strangely. I auditioned for a version of that production and got the role first, and then they were like, "Oh, you direct? Would you like to do that too?" So
Right.
I was in a very strange position. I was like, "Sure." So now I'm doing both.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so yeah, that'll be in June.
Okay.
Thank it's double cast, so there are times when I can, put on one hat and then
Yeah.
go on stage to put on the other hat. So that's at least there's that. Um, uh, I have a couple uh I have a couple projects that are in the works that are gonna, that will get the big, rollout
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are coming out as well. But I do know that I have a couple larger videos that I'm working on, including a deep dive into the history of opera and tuberculosis.
Right.
Um, so that might take a minute because it's quite a bit, it's quite a video.
Okay.
But yeah, those are the things that that I know are coming out, and everything else, look out.
That's very exciting. And
Hmm.
people, I guess, can get updates about what's coming up or what's being released on all your social media platforms.
Yes. So at Robin Hahn Sopran, that's soprano without the O. It's so it rhymes
Okay.
and also is in German. On YouTube and Instagram, that's usually where you'll be able to
All
find
right.
me.
We'll be sure to include that in the description below for all your Insta and other social media handles.
Awesome.
Robin, it's been such a delight. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and
And
just
with you.
learning about the awesomeness of you. Thank you for teaching us about how to redefine your story, to own your own narrative, and to lead life with joy. It doesn't mean toxic positivity, but with authentic joy and the power of access and inclusive storytelling. So keep telling those stories that are inclusive, that are accessible, and looking forward to see what a more accessible world looks like in the future.
Me too. Me too. And thank you so much for having me and for making this wonderful podcast. It's a joy, you know.
Ah, thanks, Robin. Hope to
Thank
chat
you.
with you again soon.
Of course, you too.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining and joining us for our next episode in the next few weeks. Bye bye.